morning, everybody, or good evening, depending on where you are. I think, apologies if you heard me shouting downstairs about not being able to start my video a minute or so ago. That was a new one that Zoom sprang on us this morning. So I'm running up and downstairs, so a little breathless. Sorry about that. Anyway, good morning and welcome. We are talking today about the 3D sphere and visual search in Photo Ephemeris Pro. So first, thank you for joining, and thank you also for being Pro subscribers. This webinar is exclusively for subscribers, so I hope you get some useful content from it. A couple of things just before I jump into the main presentation. We've got a windstorm happening here in Boulder, Colorado today. So there may be some noise, there may be some background noise that you hear. It's also possible that in these conditions, sometimes power lines get taken down. So if we lose power and everything stops, hold tight. What we'll do is try to restart the webinar on a mobile phone connection, which will probably take us a couple of minutes to sort out. Hopefully it won't happen. I doubt it will, but just in case, we'll not abandon ship entirely. If you're watching, one thing you can do, I have a shared screen with a little presentation, then we'll switch over to the browser for most of the session. If you switch your Zoom client into full screen, exactly how you do that may vary depending on the device and operating system. But then you get the option to move my picture around and out of the way of anything that's, make it bigger, make it very, very small, whatever you would like to do. Yeah, in terms of Q&A, one other feature we'll use throughout the webinar in the Zoom client, you should see a Q&A button. It's a couple of little speech bubbles. You can type your questions in there, and I will stop from time to time during this session, take a look at what's come in and try to answer what I can. I may defer some to later in the presentation, depending on how we're going on time. At the end of the webinar, there'll be a very short survey, just 2 questions. So if you have a chance to complete that, that would be great. That's very helpful. If there's a question that I don't get to, or my answer doesn't answer your question for you, then please do drop us an email at support@photoephemeris.com. That's support@photoephemeris as spelled on the slide here, and we'll answer from there. And with that, I think I'm going to quickly jump into the presentation today. So what we're going to cover, intro we've done. We'll talk about the 3D sphere within the web app. I'll cover the basics of that. So I'm going to show you it in its most basic form and try to explain how it relates to the map view that you've normally, that you'll undoubtedly have some experience with. Then show you how maps work in the sphere page, and then finally how the terrain piece works. And once we've covered that, we'll jump into visual search. And visual search, if you haven't tried it before, essentially is a way of saying, if I were to look up to a particular area of the sky, what are the dates and times at which I could see either the sun or the moon or the galactic center, the center of the Milky Way? It's the most photogenic part of the Milky Way, most people think, and I think they're correct. When will that appear in a particular area of the sky, hence visual search? So you look somewhere, if I were pointing my camera at that spot, when would those opportunities come around? So we'll look at that, and you may notice this background photo I have enabled in Zoom today. It is the location we're going to look at, and our objective for this session is to find when the moon will appear in that little gap that is sort of over my right ear. Yes, there we are, there. So that's what we're going to try and accomplish today, and should have some time for Q&A at the end. So, yes, there's the photo. I put it there, and there is the spot we're going to try and find the moon in. And there'll be a few more subtleties around which dates work well and which don't, and we'll come on to that shortly. Basically, the tutorials page, you'll get an email after this webinar with a link to this page if you don't have it, but it's on us. You can find it under support on the website that links through to this area, and then search for tutorials. But we're going to be covering mostly what's in parts 7, 8, and 9 down here. So it's the 3D sphere visual search and then maps and terrain. The reason that they're in a slightly different order is that the maps and the terrain were added after the original version of the sphere. I will be offering webinars on some of the other areas. We did a basics one a couple of weeks ago. I'll do that one again probably later in January. So you should all see an email inviting you to join that as well if you would like. Okay, let's jump into the 3D sphere. First of all, we're going to start with the map, start somewhere familiar, just so you get an idea of where we are looking. Where I'm, despite the British accent, located here in Boulder, Colorado, in the sort of western half of the US, and we're going to be exploring a national park, Rocky Mountain National Park, which is up here northwest of town. It's about 30, 40 miles away. I think it's 30-ish miles up to Estes Park here. And then the national park is located there. So I saved a location at Dream Lake, and I'm going to go to that location. So the red pin is here in the park. Now you see I've got a certain map type enabled here. This is the OpenStreetMap black and white, which is, it's very nicely styled map, but it doesn't give you much topographic information. So if I switch to, say, the outdoors style, you can see now a little bit more clearly that we've got a whole bunch of lakes in this area, a series of mountain ridges, mountain tops and summits. And the pin is positioned here at the east end of Dream Lake. And the photograph that's behind me was actually taken here a few years ago. And the camera is looking up this way. And the low point that you see the jagged peak, which is, let me see if I can point, that one there, I'm pointing in my little picture. That is Hallett Peak, which is here on the map. I'm going to do a little bit of spotlighting here just so I can circle these things. Let's have a look. Yeah, so there is Hallett Peak. This is Flat Top Mountain. And the low point that you see, I'm going to point again here, right there, is this saddle area here that is between the two peaks. So we are, again, the photo is looking in this direction here. There we are. Oh, my arrow had disappeared before I drew the arrowhead. Okay, so that's the location. Let me just recap a couple of basics here. If we look at the time slider and I move the time slider, you can see these two lines here. That is the direction from the red pin to the sun. The blue line is the direction from the red pin towards the moon. And you can see that as we advance through the day, they progress from east to west, transiting to the south because we're in the northern hemisphere in this location, and they set sort of southwest. This is the date I have selected is today. If I click right now, that's basically, if we were standing there, we'd be looking in this direction to look at the sun, this direction to look at the moon. So that is the basics of the map, and you're getting basically an overhead view. So if you click to the sphere, let me give you sort of the equivalent, and that is the same overhead view. And I set the sphere up that way to appear. Normally, if you go to it for the first time, it's not going to look quite like this. I set this up just to give the simple visual comparison between the overhead view of the map and its equivalent in the sphere. But the sphere is somewhat different. But as you see, things move in the same direction. So I'm coming back to sunrise today. I'm progressing through the day. And you can see, I'm going to make them a little bit bigger here. There we are, 8x. So with this control here, you can change the size of the sun and the moon. Just one thing, in case you missed how I got to this page, I was on the map, and the links across the top here, top right of the page, I click sphere, and there we go. That's how I got there. So I move through the day, and there are a few things that you can see here. First of all, we've got the essentially compass bearing. So 0 degrees is true north, 180 degrees is due south, 90 is due east, and 270 is due west. And you can see that as I'm just looking at the sun here, you see the little triangle there. That is pointing to, essentially, it's a gauge that gives you the azimuth, which is, to think of it as bearing or heading of the sun. So if I were to look towards the sun, look down to the horizon, that's the direction I'd be looking in. And you can see that numerically. If I come to, let's say, here when it's pointing to 180 degrees due south, and there indeed in the legend on the chart, it's reading just shy of 180 degrees. So that's what that little triangle is. It's an azimuth indicator. And the line from the red pin to the path line, it always lines up with the azimuth. It's easy to see in this overhead view. Same thing for the moon. And if I were to enable it, here we are, same thing for the galactic center. So that other line, this one here, is pointing to the galactic center, which is in theory visible, but of course it's not because the sun is up. I'll come back to that a little bit later. I'm going to turn it off just to keep things relatively simple for now. So there we go. We're moving through the day. You can see the shadow of the pin itself moving here. And if I advance towards the end of the day, you can see the shadows get longer, everything gets darker, and then at night it's all dark. It gets super dark once we're beyond all the twilight hours, and we put on this little overhead light just to indicate, hey, you're in the middle of the night. That's why you can't really see anything. Here we are. There's the sun back. Now, next thing to know about the sphere. I'm just checking my notes here, make sure I said everything I wanted to. Yeah, so let me show you how to move it. So there are basically two ways you can interact with this sphere itself. If I click, I'm using a trackpad, so it might be slightly different on a mouse, but it's basically the same thing. I click down on the trackpad, I'm holding my thumb down, I'm pushing my finger up, and it's like rolling your ball on the surface of a sphere. It turns it around. So you can see here, I'm turning this thing around, and I can go from side to side. I can change the angle like that. And so you can get a 3D view of the paths of the sun and the moon, which is already giving you more of a visual sense of how high in the sky they are during the course of the day. The other thing that I can do on the trackpad here is with 2 fingers, I can zoom in. So it's a bit like on your mobile phone, the reverse pinch gesture. So 2 fingers down, spread them apart, and it sort of pulls the object towards you. That's conceptually what it's doing. And I do that, and things get a little bit easier to see. I'll also switch. I'm looking at these controls here at the top, just above the sphere. And if I drop that down to 1x, that is, in relative terms, how big the sun and the moon appear in the sky at their true size, which, as you can see, it's pretty tiny, which is why we give these options to enlarge them. Just if you're not quite as zoomed in, it's easier to visually track these things when they're artificially large. So I'm going to leave that probably at, let's try 2x. That's probably good enough for what we're going to do today. So that's that. Let's just look at the shadows once more. So I'm going to reverse back to sunrise this morning. You see that shadow extending. And if you're familiar with I covered this in the basics webinar the other day. On the map here, you see, as I'm adjusting the time, once the sun is below 6 degrees above the horizon, which it is here just before 8 o'clock, that circle turns orange, and that's the indication that we're in so-called golden hour, which we define as when the sun is between 0 and 6 degrees. And that's shorthand for, hey, there may be some nice light for landscape and outdoor photography during that time. The sphere, just one little thing to know about, is when the edge of the pin hits the edge of the sphere, that's also the start of golden hour. So you can judge, how good the light is when the shadow hits the edge of the circle. So let me just check in for any questions. I think we're good at the moment. And next, we're going to talk about maps. So on the map page, I clicked on the map link towards the top right here. Always 2D, essentially. You can change the map style up here. So I can switch to a neighborhood map, which is great for cities, not so good for the great outdoors. I can switch to Mapbox satellite maps, which good quality satellite, but no labels. I can enable Google Maps, and we can have Google's terrain map, I think, is excellent. That's a very good one. You get map options when you use the sphere as well. So let me switch back to the sphere. And now I'm going to enable maps. Now these are on by default, so you've probably all seen this already, but let me just show it to you. There we go. We're getting the same map as we had, map style as we had selected on the map page. Unfortunately, we can't use the Google map styles on the sphere page because Google wants you to use their maps within their particular, what they call an SDK, a software development kit. So you can't just take the Google Maps and paint them on the 3D model of this sphere in the way that I can with these other map styles. However, you can change the map style. You get the same selection as you do on the map page when default map is selected, and I can use a satellite map. Satellite maps are okay, but they look a little bit dark, and putting light on them is, you can sort of see what's going on, but it's a little bit, tends to be a little bit dark and dingy, I find. So one of the ones that is good for this, it's still a flat map, but you can see the topography, so you can read the contour lines. I know you're all thinking, but there's a better way, isn't there? And there is, and we're going to get to it shortly. But still, it's good to know what's going on with map style selection up here. The other thing to know is I want to make a distinction between changing the map zoom level and flying in to view the sphere from different angles. They're slightly different things conceptually, although you might say, okay, did I just zoom in? Well, I did in one sense, that I brought the sphere closer to me, so I'm looking at it from a closer distance, but the level of detail on the map didn't change. I can change the level of detail on the map using the controls here. So I can zoom out like that and zoom back in again. There are limits as to how far you can zoom in and out, which is to do with the other feature that we're going to talk about next, which is the 3D terrain. So let's get into looking at some 3D terrain. So to enable that, I use this switch up here, the little stacked triangles. It's shorthand for 3D topography, and I click that to enable it. And all of a sudden we have part of a 3D model. Now, coming back to that idea of zooming in, zooming out, you can see here that really I don't have enough terrain coverage to get a sense of my surroundings for this particular photograph. So I'm going to zoom out one level here and maybe one level more. There we go. And now you've got much more of a sense of what you're looking at in the 3D area. So remember that you can use click and drag with your mouse or trackpad to rotate this model, to have a look around. And with my 2-finger pinch gesture on the trackpad, I'm guessing a middle wheel on a mouse will do the same thing. I haven't tried it for a long time, so forgive me if I'm not quite right on that. You can change the view. Now, one thing to be aware of, what I'll do, that's a reasonable view. I'm going to adjust the time of day, and now you can see the shadows on this map moving. And that's based on a simulated lighting. So we're looking at sunlight during the course of the day. And as I advance, the shadows get longer, and they're coming from this direction. You see from the southwest-ish here. The sun is over here. Hopefully you can see my mouse there towards the lower left. And once it gets dark, it gets dark. And eventually the moon will come up. But as you can see right now, the moon is down. So now we're in true darkness, so that little spotlight comes on. If you say, well, that's a bit hopeless, I can't see anything, you can turn on some artificial lighting up here at the top right. And that lets you read the map. It's green to give you a clue that this is artificial. It's not meant to be simulating anything in particular. And it's really just there as a convenience. So I'm going to turn that off, and we'll come back to the daylight hours, which are a little bit more exciting for this purpose. One other thing to be aware of, I'm going to switch back briefly to the map here, the 2D map. You can see there are shadows there as well. Those shadows are baked into the map style. So these maps that you see are generally rendered as images. So they're little tiles, map tiles, 256 by 256 pixels. You can sometimes see them loading sequentially, depending on how fast or slow your internet connection is. And when the map designer produces these maps, they decide what lighting to bake in. I believe there is a convention that these topographic maps are typically lit from the northwest. So the shadows tend to fall on the southeastern sides of the terrain. But just be aware of that. If I switch to this map, it doesn't have any of that hill shading, which is what that baked in shadows is called. But that means that when we look at it here, the only shadows you're seeing are the ones coming from the 3D model there. So what are you using this for? For example, you might be saying, well, look, I'm interested in, where the shadows are going to be. Is my subject, so let's say, for example, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more here. There we go. I want to photograph up this valley. There's Hallett Peak. There's Flat Top Mountain. I think that's right, yeah. And shooting up this valley, if I'm at 3 o'clock this afternoon, it's probably not going to be that good. It's all in shadow. So those are the basic questions that you would get answers to from this sort of technology. And of course, you can adjust the day, you can adjust the time of year as well. So let's go back to last summer and see where things are at. Say 23rd of June, picking a date at random. And same time of day, let's go back to 3 o'clock. Sun is far higher in the sky. The whole thing is going to be bleached out with sunlight from overhead. I can advance the day, and you see it stays in the light far, far, far longer. And the sun is coming in here from farther to the west and the northwest. There we go. And it's really not until 6:24 that it's falling into complete shadow. But it's still not necessarily the very best time to photograph this subject. If we go back to around sunrise, this is in June, you can see that at the very start of the day, half of it is in shadow still because the sun is rising too far to the northeast in the height of summer. So if we were to look manually, just adjust the date into, say, mid-September, and of course now the sun is rising later, so I need to advance the time. That's looking a little bit better. You can see here the sun is coming from behind. It's lighting the valley more or less straight up the valley, so the light is behind you if you're photographing from the red pin location, and the subject should be well lit at that point. So those are the sorts of questions you can answer with the 3D terrain. You can do the same for the moon. Let me find, there's a full moon. Okay, so at night, so the sun is still up here. Let me go later till when the moon rises, and you can see that we get moon shadows as well. If you've ever gone out at night and photographed say, a long exposure. I've seen some of these done in places like the Maroon Bells here in Colorado, and plenty of other places too. But you take a 30-second exposure with a reasonably full moon in the sky, and the shadows come out as, coining an expression, as clear as day. And it's just a question of the exposure time for the shot. So it's still useful to see where the shadows are going to lie with the moon. Let me just come back to the previous evening, and I've got a bit more time to play with in this 24-hour period. And so you can see moon shadows too. We don't show moon shadows for the Milky Way. Any shadows for the Milky Way. Yes, you can get some shadows from starlight, I guess, if you're really looking closely, but obviously they're far less well defined because there are lots of stars and so forth. So what this is showing you for the Milky Way, let me come back. Let's have a look here. We don't want to be at full moon particularly. I'm going to go back to, okay, there is a new moon. And if I get over here, summer months are fairly good for this. Here is the center of the galactic center, and put some working light on, that just shows up. There's the path from the red pin to the galactic center. So if you're saying, where will the band of the Milky Way appear at around 9:40 on an early September evening in this particular location, that's where you can see that. Let me just pull that down so you can get that a little bit better. So that band of spheres is a representation of the band of the Milky Way, and the largest sphere is the galactic center. So that's your most photogenic spot. So if you're shooting the Milky Way, generally people prefer to try to shoot this part of the band, and knowing where it lies in the sky and also what angle it is with the horizon is useful for composing your photographs. Sometimes you might wish to compose a shot with, say, your subject and the arc of the Milky Way over the top of it. So knowing the orientation of the band, the height, the angle of the band relative to the horizon can give you a sense of whether the shot you're looking for is possible, or whether you need to adjust your shooting location or times and dates and so forth. So I think that's probably covered everything I wanted to say about the 3D terrain. I'm going to take the working lights off. I'm going to come back to today. I'm going to turn the Milky Way off before we jump into the next section, which is on visual search. So visual search is it's a convenience. It's getting computers to do what computers are really good at, which is an awful lot of calculations very quickly that can save you time and help you find photo opportunities that you might otherwise not realize were there. So let me be a bit more specific about what I mean. I mentioned back at the start of the talk that our objective for this session was to see if we could find, just pointing at my head again, times when the moon is going to be roughly in this area. I'm pointing over my shoulder here, if you're able to see my picture, and photograph that. So the objective is, when can we find the moon here? So let me talk you through the manual way of doing that first, so you get a sense of what the difference is between the sort of standard approach and what you can do with the features in the Pro version. So hopefully some of you, many of you maybe, have tried the Geodetics tool. I'm going to enable that here on the map on the right-hand side. I click that, it adds an extra pin to the map, and I can pick that up and drag it, and I can drop it. I could put it up, let's say just there. I'm looking at the topographic maps are great for this, because everybody's got a fairly intuitive understanding, I think, of contour lines and how to read them. And so you can say, well, that looks like a bit of a prominent point on this ridge. Is that a northeast ridge? Maybe it is, of Hallett Peak. And so if I drop the pin there, down below the map, all of a sudden we're getting a little bit of numerical information about the difference between the red pin and the gray pin, or the primary pin and the secondary pin. That's how you'll see them referred to in some of the tutorial material. So the distance is 1 mile. You can switch the units, by the way, if you prefer to be looking at kilometers or meters in settings. I can click settings up here at the top right, and I can switch it from English to metric. I'm back. I'm going to leave it in English settings. You can also, I should mention this, change the language up here at the top right as well. So if you want it auf Deutsch or in Italian, there's a few different languages to choose from there. But they're in English, so British English imperial units. Back to the map, and distance of 1 mile from the red pin to the grey pin. That's what this little icon is suggesting here, towards the lower left. At a bearing of 259 degrees, so roughly westish, a little bit south of west. An elevation difference of 2,000 feet. So to get from red to grey, you would be ascending 2,000 feet. I think that's fairly easy to see from the contour lines. And this is the really important one: elevation angle of 20.7 degrees. So that means if you were looking straight out at eye level, so the true horizon is always at your natural eye level. If any of you have taken drawing classes, for example, you might have been asked to work out whether the horizon line is, and it's generally, if you feel you're not looking up or looking down, but looking straight out, that's the horizon line, and that's 0 degrees. So that's this on the chart down here at the right. You can see it's set to 0 degrees, and the angle from the horizon up to the grey pin is around 20.7 degrees. So great. Let's put the grey pin where we're going to, the spot we want to identify for this shot. Where do we want the moon somewhere in this, above this little area here that I talked about. So if I put the pin up there, what I'm going to do, I saved this location earlier just to make sure that I could do this consistently. So I called it Flat Top Saddle, which is not an official name. That's my name. So I put the grey pin. I know I did that very quickly. Let me just recap, just so you can see. I went to locations. I typed in part of the name of the location I'd saved to filter it. It found it as Flat Top Saddle. Because I have geodetics enabled, I can either set the red pin to that location or the grey pin, and I clicked grey, go for the grey pin. And it set that grey pin right to the saved location I had. So now we're going to look at this in sphere, and this is where things start to get a bit more interesting. So let's see what we have. Hopefully you can see, I'm going to zoom in just so that it's clear. In the 3D model now, the grey pin, the secondary pin, is at that same position, and visually you can see that it's higher. You don't have to interpret the contour lines. You can just look at the terrain and the lighting and see this angle from red to grey position. So far, so good. This is our setup now for using the visual search tool. So let me just check in on the Q&A before I jump into that. Okay, let me just look at this one. I glanced away when you chose terrain in the sphere. Okay, let me recap that one quickly. To enable the terrain, it's this control here above. So you're on the sphere page, the menu up here, and there are two switches. I turn it off and it disappears. That's interesting. It's good to see this, in fact, because now you can see that even though the 3D terrain is off, we're still representing the angle, the 20.7, it wasn't, no, what did it, I moved it. So it's 13.5 degrees from red to grey pin. So that's maps off, maps on, terrain on. So up here, let me see if I can just make sure that everybody was able to locate those controls with my little pen. It's these ones here. Enable maps on the left and enable terrain there, and that controls the size of the sun and the moon in the 3D model. One more question quickly. Can I zoom in and out with a mouse without a center wheel? It's an excellent question, and I wish I knew the answer. I haven't had a mouse without a center wheel for years, so I don't know. But let me see if I can find that, and I'll try to add it to the tutorial, Don, or if you want to drop us an email. Okay, oh, here we go. Graham says you can use the right-hand button on the mouse. Cool. So maybe, Don, you could try that and let us know if that works for you. So visual search, I'm going to use my little spotlight piece again. And the visual search control is here. Oh, you see, that's when I use my mouse instead. Right, that little switch there. So that's what you click on to enable the visual search tools. You can do that at any time in the sphere page. You have to be in the sphere page to use it. So make sure that you're there. Then we click that. And there's a whole load of stuff pops up here. So the objective of the next 10 to 15 minutes or so is to give you a quick introduction to using this tool. And we're going to use it specifically to find when the moon is going to appear in this area of the sky, in this location. So I'm going to zoom out first of all to show you what's going on. You may have noticed that when I enabled visual search, this little square, this transparent area showed up. So let me explain to you what that is, first of all. What that represents is essentially the input to the visual search. It's saying, what area of the sky would you like the app to search for the sun in? Let's work out how we know that. First of all, we've got the sun selected under body. So I'm looking here on the right of the page. Visual search tab is selected. Body is the sun. You can choose the moon or the galactic center. And I'll just leave it on sun for now. I'm going to ignore disk alignment. That's more of an advanced feature we probably won't cover today. Duration of 6 months. That means how far from the selected date. The selected date is up here at the top left, December the 30th, today. So from today for 6 months, search for times when the sun can be found in this area of the sky. I'm just let me just do some highlighting again, just so nobody misses this. This thing here, this is what I'm talking about. This, I sort of missed it. Let me try and circle that again. Oh, that, there we are. And that corresponds to this area of the search input here. So an altitude and an azimuth range. Altitude is the elevation angle from the horizon. So it's saying when the sun is between 2 degrees above the horizon up to 10 degrees above the horizon. And an azimuth is, think of it as the bearing. So it's basically saying when it's more or less due east. And these are the defaults for visual search. So if I now, I'm going to zoom that around because you'll see what happens better. If I just run the search as it is, let's see what happens. I get 29 results, and they're in ascending order, chronological ascending order. And it's basically saying that, oh, we're going to find the sun in this area of the sky on the 16th of March next year. Now, if I click it, you can see that it's only just scraping the corner of the area that we defined. And indeed, it's only in that area for 2 minutes. That's what these little time estimates are. So let's say we wanted a better result when it's really going to slice through the area of the sky that we're interested in. You could look for, there are 2 visual clues to use in these search results that will tell you that. The first one is the duration. So that's 43 minutes. So that's the max. I click on that. And you can see that the sun is right in the middle of the area at 7:26 in the morning. And the other visual clue is this little, what I call a spark line. A spark line is like sort of mini graph, mini chart, if you will. And it sort of shows the line slicing through the center of the target area. So that's saying, hey, this is a really good match for the search that you put in. Then as we advance further through the year, you can see we're getting later into spring, and the sun is tracking further north. So it's starting to only scrape the top corner there. Let me come back here. So let's now do a search for the moon. So the first thing we need to do, I'm going to come back to today's date. So we're going to search from today again. I'm going to switch it to the moon, top right, body moon. I'm going to search for much longer. And when you're searching for the moon, I would advise you always to choose a longer search duration. The reason for that is that the moon moves about, as you know, it's much harder for us to predict as people where we're going to see the moon day to day versus the sun. The sun tends to move somewhat gradually, and it doesn't leap from day to day particularly, whereas the moon, if you've observed it at all, can change its position in the sky quite significantly day by day. It also changes over the course of a 19.5-year cycle, roughly speaking, and it changes how far north or how far south you can ever see it. So sometimes, and it's, if you look up, there's a thing called the Great Lunar Standstill, which is sort of one of the extremes of this 19.5-year cycle, where the sun can be seen at its northerly and southerly extents. And so it's really good to search over longer periods for the moon. Let's jump into it. How can we easily set the target area? Well, there are two ways we can do it. We could either type it in. So here I'm going to say, I'll just show you a different example. I'm going to say an altitude of 5 to 15 degrees at an azimuth of 250 to 260 degrees. And you can see that as I'm typing, it's moving that, it's redisplays, there we are. So I widened it to 240 to 260, and now it's showing a 20-degree span for the search target area. But really, we want it sort of in this area. Easiest way to do it is to click this Use Geodetics button just here. So I click that, and it sets it to basically the altitude now spans the 13.5 degree elevation angle that we had set, and the azimuth now spans the bearing from red to grey pin. So this azimuth range is centered on 262 degrees, and the altitude span is centered on 13.5 degrees. Now that looks a little bit wide to me, so I'm going to narrow that up a little bit manually. So I'm going to do 258 to, let's say, 266. Okay, so that's looking a bit better, isn't it? I think I need to reduce this a little bit. It's looking a little bit too tall, so I'm going to bring that down to, say, 16 degrees. And I'm going to raise this up because it's no point in looking for the sun when it's below the saddle. So if I put that into 13.5 degrees, let's say 13.5 to, I don't know, 18 or 20, not 200, 20. Oh, there we are. I managed to break it. Let's try that again. Altitude, what did I say? I said 13.5 to 20. There we go. Okay. So now let us run a search and see what we get. Search. 225 results. The first of them is, this one looks pretty good. It is on the 22nd of January. And you can now see, I'm going to zoom in a little, adjust my camera position, and zoom in. There you are. You can see I'm going to fly towards the base of the pin, and there you go. So the moon is in the right area of the sky. It's somewhat higher than the ridge line there, but it's definitely in the target area. However, there are a few issues. We've got a whole bunch of results. It's sort of an overwhelming number of results. One of the challenges with this particular result is that it's right in the middle of the day. And as you can see, the valley is in shadow. The sun is relatively, it's high-ish in the sky. It's not that high, it's 12 degrees, but it's still past the best light and it's not in the best orientation. So what are some of the things we can do here? Well, let's look at some of the other results as well. We've got this one here. There's another one. Moon's in the right place, but it's after the sun is set, so everything's dark. So that's not much help either. So things you can do to filter it down to results that you care about. You click on the filters tab. So I'm back here on the top right, and I could say I'm going to add, I want the sun to be between 0 degrees and let's just say 12 degrees. I apply that filter. And now the results, it's only showing me 27 out of the 225 results that I found. So let's look again. Saturday, 22nd of January result conforms to that. So that's so far so good, but it's still not quite in the right area of the sky. So another thing, you can come back and add another filter. So let's say we're going to filter on the sun azimuth this time. And I want the sun ideally to be roughly due east. So let's give it a fairly wide latitude. We'll say from, I don't know, 60 to 120 degrees. Apply. Okay, now we're down to 9 results. Our January result was filtered out because of that, because the sun is too far to the south. But let's have a look at this one in September. And this is looking a bit more promising. So we have a moon in the right position. We've got the sun in the right area to illuminate the valley. It's more or less behind us. The sun's at a good position. It's relatively full as well, so that's quite handy. Let's have a look at some more. What about here in September 2024? That's even nicer. So this one is, as you can see, the sun is much lower in the sky. So it's 6:57. The sun's only 1 degree, 1 and a bit degrees above the horizon. The moon is almost full, so 97% full. The full is 100%. And it's a 25-minute shooting window. So as I adjust the time, you can see, there you go. We've got plenty of options to try a whole bunch of shots with the light changing behind us on that day. It's not for a long time though, is it? 2024. And there aren't, well, that one's, yeah, it's still not as good. That one is after, it's still a little bit too light after sunrise, really. The sun's okay, it's at 8, 9 degrees, but the light is, you can see the quality of the light, it's less orange. So the color temperature that we show in the model changes with the altitude of the sun. But anyway, have a play with these filters. There are a bunch of suggested filters as well. So you could say, actually, I only care about full moons. I'll apply that filter, and it filters on the illuminated fraction of the moon between 0 and 1, where 1 is 100%. And that brings us down to just 2 results. And one of them is our September 2024 result. So these filters are additive. They're like this and that must be true. The other thing to know about the filters very briefly is that they may not be true for the entire span of the result. They just have to be true at some point during this 25 minutes or this 36 minutes. And the reason we do that, it's sort of like a relaxed approach to filtering, is that otherwise, if you said all these conditions, these filter conditions had to be true for the entire duration, you might rule out opportunities where the moon, for example, is in the place you want it in the sky, and the other conditions are true, but you've ruled it out because it wasn't true for the entirety of the span that you've defined. So that's just a little thing to know about filters. So yeah, I think we've sort of achieved our goal. We've got a reasonably full moon in the right part of the sky with the sun in a good position, lighting the valley, and we should be able to get a nice shot, which is an enhancement of this one where there's no moon at all. And that's probably it. I'm going to jump over to Q&A now. Let's have a look here. Yeah, okay. So Rosita, apologies if I mispronounced your name there, but excellent question. Is there a way to plan for the right light for a moon shot, for example, 0 to 15 minutes after sunset? So the answer is yes. We don't do it by time. We do it by the altitude of the sun. So what you would do in this instance, you would say near sunrise or sunset, and you could specify, you could say, if you wanted it just after sunset, you would say maybe from -4 to 0, something like that. And I can apply that filter here and I still get 12 results. That's not a good example for this particular shot setup because you'd be looking west into a bright sky. with your subject in shadow. Okay, good question from Jerry. Can you locate the position of the moon when it is closest to Earth for a larger moon? Yes, you can. So I'm going to get rid of that filter and I'm going to apply the supermoon filter. So the supermoon, I'm assuming that most people will say that that's when the moon is full. The moon can be closest to Earth without being full. It can be closest at the moment of new moon, which is often when you get eclipses, in fact. But for photographic purposes, a supermoon is typically thought of as a perigee, i.e. perigee closest to Earth, apogee farthest from Earth, perigee full moon. If you apply this, it says, so it's got to be mostly full, and the semi-diameter, which is the half angular diameter, is between these two values. Those are sort of pre-canned values. You can look these up online if you want, but that'll give you a supermoon. And we have indeed 3 results where this applies. And look at that, I hadn't realized that, but our September 2024 result is also a supermoon. So that's, you can do that. One other thing quickly on supermoons. So I click that result, it sets the date here at the top left. If I go to the map and move that out of the way, I'm pretty sure that if I go, let's have a look, it's going to be backwards. There we go. I clicked to the previous event, and there's the perigee event a few days beforehand. So the disk is 13.8% larger than it would be at apogee when the moon is farthest from Earth. So those perigee events, which is when the moon is larger, they also pop up in the timeline here, and you can find them by skipping from event to event using these buttons top left there. Colleen asks, I'd like to find the moon near my house without trees in the way of the shot. Is it possible? Yes, it is possible, but it's probably not really possible with the web app. Simply because the web app doesn't have access to the specifics of the trees around particular locations. So what I would recommend, Colleen, for that is you could use the iOS app. It has an augmented reality view, which is augmented reality basically says, take your phone, look through the camera, overlay information on the camera feed in some way, enhance, augment the reality of what you're seeing through the camera. So you can use AR to find out what the sightline is past the trees. And a very simple thing you can do there is in the AR view, it shows you the azimuth and the altitude as you move the device around. So you can use that as an input to visual search. If you say, well, look, I know that the window, with augmented reality, I've worked out that that my window is, X degrees altitude by Y degrees azimuth, you could pump that into visual search here and it would give you those answers. Jerry asks, can I send a reminder, a calendar, once I set up my shot? What you can do, Jerry, is up at the top right here, there's a share button. The share will give you a link. The link fully specifies the time, the date, the map zoom level, the pin positions, all of that good stuff. You can copy it there and you could put that into a calendar appointment. There's not really any super good integration with calendar straight out of most browsers yet. And I haven't done a thing which would allow you to download an appointment. But I really like that idea, and I think that's something I should look at adding because that would be convenient. You can add calendar reminders from the iOS app, just so you know. Michael asks, what is the CDU? Yeah, okay, good question. This thing here, so that's a label on the map. CDT, Colorado Department of Transportation. I don't know, not sure. Oh, I know what it is. It's the Continental Divide Trail. That's what it is. I don't know what the IDU thing means, but I get questions about this from time to time in other areas, and these labels are sort of acronyms for typically for well-known trails. So there's one out on the east coast of the US for the some cycle trail, Greenway cycle trail or something. That people sometimes ask about, but yeah, that's the Continental Divide Trail. Where's slightly over time. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be sending out a follow-up email with a link to all of the tutorials. You'll get a survey to complete, so if you could do that, that would be great. We'll be running more of these in the new year. If you would like to suggest any subjects or things you'd like to see covered, let me know. And thanks again for joining. I hope it's been useful and look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks again.